live in Wyoming. God wants you. What do you do when God calls you out? Are you looking for the ways that God calls you? Or are you looking for a way out? As followers of God, we must act when God calls us. We read in the Bible of a young Jewish orphan girl named Esther who followed God. When our story begins, she is living her life with her cousin Mordecai as his daughter. King Xerxes, meanwhile, is looking for a replacement wife. Esther is pulled into a year-long prep for this beauty contest that would culminate with a night with the king for his final choice. Esther won the queen contest, so life is good, until Haman's plot to kill the Jews makes its way to her attention. She is now faced with a choice. Either one, try her best to keep her Jewish heritage a secret in order to save her own life, even if other Jews are killed by the king's edict. Or two, tell the truth and face the king's wrath for an uninvited audience with him. This spells certain death for Esther if the king does not put out his scepter to her. Her cousin Mordecai advised her by saying, "Who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" She acts on Mordecai's words and decides to have compassion for her people rather than follow her selfish desires. Esther goes to talk to the king, and instead of a sentence, he offers her up to half his kingdom. But she asks only for him and his right-hand man Haman to attend a banquet she had prepared for the king. At the banquet, she requests they attend another banquet prepared special for them. Finally, Esther says in the book of Esther, chapter 7, starting in verse 3, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request." Esther tells the king that Haman was behind it all, so the king had Haman impaled on a pole and gave his possessions to Esther. Now, continuing to be brave, she falls at the king's feet and begs him to give the Jews a right to live. So then, the king gives Mordecai the power to make the law needed. Esther, with God, has succeeded. God called Esther for such a time as this. I've quickly told a portion of the biblical story of Esther to remind us how she answered God's call at great peril to her own life. Now, how can we, like Esther, follow God's will today in our lives? We have seen examples of this recently in the public eye. The movie God's Not Dead shows a young man in college that was faced with a decision like Esther's, to cower and take the easy way out, or stand up and defend God with risks that had long-reaching consequences. His conviction to God was too strong for him to ignore this opportunity he was called to act upon. He had to refute the lies that Satan had used to destroy a man's faith. In the end, his whole class saw a devout follower of God defend God and show that he is not dead. In lesser-known news, there are two debates about the existence of God in the past couple months. The most recent debate was between Dr. Bart Ehrman from the University of North Carolina and Kyle Butt from Apologetics Press. Kyle took the call to defend God against the proposition that he does not exist. Kyle studied for 1 year to gather and understand the information needed to adequately and effectively defend the truth of God. He asked every Christian he knew for prayers on his behalf to keep God's hand holding him up. We can learn from Kyle's example that we are to put our complete being into doing what God calls us to do and prepare for anything God wills for us, no matter the consequences of this world. Esther was called for such a time as this. Her circumstances were dire. All of the Jews were to be killed. But there are always times such as these that God calls us to act on, day to day, week to week, year to year, from this lifetime until we enter the next. Even if it's hard, we need to be like Kyle, learning all we can on the subject of God, internalize his word. When we do this, we know that Romans 8:28 is true, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God wants to work in our lives and do great things through us, but he won't if we don't let him. As followers of God, we must act when God calls us. Are you still looking for a way out of God's will, or are you looking for the ways that God calls you? What are you going to do the next time God calls you? God wants you.